So I think that this is such a great comment. Not arguing, just want to further this conversation. What are your thoughts on those that were the first of a tradition and therefore wouldn't have someone to initiate them? These are exactly the conversations that I want to have, and I do not take these kind of questions as like an argument in any way. So I really appreciate you even commenting this, because I don't think enough people talk about this. My thoughts on this is that every tradition starts somewhere. Every tradition started with someone. Hello? Now, I do think it's important to kind of like define some vocabulary before I get into my answer more. So when I think of tradition, I think of what some people might think of as like denomination. And when I think of coven, I know this is controversial, but I think kind of like church. And maybe you have heard me use this sort of analogy before. I know it's not great, okay? But you could have like 6 different Methodist churches downtown, right? And they're all Methodist. And so at the end of the day, a lot of them are going to identify with the same values and principles because they are all Methodist. But if you talk to the individual people that run the worship team at each of those churches, chances are it's going to be a little bit different based on who's running what church and what that worship team looks like. And honestly, I think that initiatory covenry is very similar in the sense that you can be part of a tradition. So in my case, American traditional folkloric witchcraft, but from coven to coven, the interpretation of the tradition can vary wildly. And I think that that's completely okay. I mean, you know, covens are supposed to have autonomy. That's part of what makes a coven and not a congregation. And also, I've been running a coven longer than I've been initiated within a tradition. And let's talk about that. The Solar Court Coven is a Midwest-based Circle City coven of witches. And it started when we were all in our early 20s. And then over the years, our circle turned into a coven. And if you would like some more stories about that, I'm happy to share that. And with that being said, I am the high priestess of the Solar Court Coven, and I have been standing in the middle of the circle now for almost a decade, and only 2.5, 3 of those years have I been formally initiated within the tradition. And there's some story time there too, if you're curious. But to answer your question, like, how would I feel about someone being the first of a tradition and therefore wouldn't have someone to initiate them? At the end of the day, my own initiator kind of put it to me like this. There is the big I initiation, which comes from spirits. And then there is the little I initiation, which comes from people. When you are initiating into a coven, ideally, the big I and little I initiation is happening all at the same time. Now, in our tradition, we do have self-initiations, but I think that's the whole title self-initiation is a little bit misleading because ultimately the spirits initiate who they initiate. And for those of you that are ATW ghoulies, then you know what I'm talking about. But you're not the first of your tradition. Even if you are like the first mortal to start a tradition, you were initiated by some kind of otherworldly spirit. And maybe that's like my witchy hot take, is that I don't believe that traditions start out of nowhere. I don't believe that we live in a vacuum. When I first started the Solar Court Coven, it was born out of necessity. There was a group of us kind of ragtag, queer, outcast witches that at the time didn't really feel like we had a welcome seat at any of the more traditional tables. So we made our own, period. And I would say for you, the commenter, but for anyone else who's watching this, honey, do not be afraid to just like literally make your own table. Do not grovel at the feet of any sort of priest or priestess, because baby, I don't care about those titles, and neither should you. Those titles might mean something within a tradition. But just because someone is a high priest or high priestess, including myself, does not mean Jack or Jill about anything if you're not in that tradition. There's nothing stopping anyone, nor should there be anything to stop anyone from starting their own table, period. But yeah, I think that's kind of my thoughts. Let me know if this was helpful. And for any of those of you who are watching, please like ask the questions, because I don't interpret it as an argument. Matter of fact, I love having philosophical conversations. And I would love to have it in like a civil kind of way. So please feel free to drop them down below. And just for the sake of this, I will be responding to these questions from my traditions background, which is American traditional folkloric witchcraft. And you can Google that if you're interested. And blessed be in this be, and so mote it be, period.